Okay, we'll do one more from Steve Darrow, and then I'll try and do one tomorrow. I got it. Steve Darrow, Chris Taylor, Steve Darrow, Chris Taylor. So I'll do both of these two, and then we'll call it a day. So back to Steve Darrow. In the past few years, we've seen the rise of what is being called the intellectual dark web, and includes people of very different political persuasions that are willing to have reasoned conversations with each other. If you could assemble a panel discussion with 5 people with a single moderator, who would you select as the panelists? Whom would you select as the moderator, and what topic would you propose? A great question. Well, I don't know who I'd select as the moderator, but it wouldn't be me, but I would like to be one of the panelists. And I think I think my subject would be, this is a profound question, Steve. And so let me answer you as best I can here. When people talk about the dark intellectual web, there are some exceedingly unpleasant people out there. And so, again, I'm always careful about what I say, but lately I've been extra special careful about what I say. Among the people that are out there that interests me is a small group of people that would call themselves alt-right people. However, I have watched a few things that they've done, and I'm convinced that much of this racism that they're broadcasting is in fact trolling, and I'm quite sure about this. I really think, again, this is an area that's relatively new to me, but I think very, very important. I think what's going on is that there is an entire subculture of people who wouldn't call themselves conservative, but who definitely despise the whole progressive idea and who have nothing but contempt for the whole social justice warrior movement. And I'll give you an example of why I believe so much of this is trolling, although you have to be careful because you don't want to end up with actual genuine racists or Nazis. I suspect there's exceedingly few of those. I think most of it is trolling, and I'll tell you why. One of the groups of people that I find very, very, very interesting is 4chan. 4chan is a group of exceedingly bright people who they're not playing computer games. The entire internet is the game for them. The intersection between the internet and the real world is the game for 4chan. 4chan describe themselves as weaponized autism, and I think that's exactly perfect. I mentioned it before. There's an internet channel on YouTube, a YouTube channel you need to go and see. Many of you won't get it, but some of you will. And it's called Internet Historian. And Internet Historian deals with many of the activities of 4chan. And many of these activities I am so completely on board with and agree that it makes me actually on some level relieved that there's such an enormous pool of absolute genius. I'm not talking about just smart people. I'm talking about weaponized autism, genius that's out there in 4chan. So let me tell you what I think about the trolling thing. Is people say 4chan is so racist, and the racist stuff is everywhere on 4chan. But as an example, 4chan got involved by they like to manipulate the web. They like to manipulate behavior. And I think, yeah, Pepe the Frog is mascot of Trump's sort of alt-right supporters. And Pepe the Frog is a great example. But let me give you a better example of what I think is mostly trolling on the part of the alt-right and especially on the part of 4chan. I think it was Mountain Dew, was going to come up with the name of uh, a new brand of Mountain Dew, a new flavor. And I think it was kind of like a sour apple kind of thing. I don't know. But it was a new Mountain Dew. And Mountain Dew decided that they would have the people, the internet, would name this new Mountain Dew drink. They would have a contest, and the name with the most votes was going to be the official name of the new Mountain Dew flavor. And because of Mountain Dew making this challenge, and because 4chan decided to get involved with it, it turned out that the #1 flavor for Mountain Dew is called Hitler Did Nothing Wrong. That's the name of the new flavor. Hitler Did Nothing Wrong is the name of the new Mountain Dew drink based on people's responses to the internet poll. In the same way that when the British Navy, Royal Navy, and somebody who's not a sailor decided that they were going to have one of the British Navy's new ships named by the British people on the internet. And the name of the ship turned out to be HMS Boaty McBoatface. Now that is playing around, and I simply cannot imagine that the entire campaign to make Mountain Dew's new flavor be called Hitler Did Nothing Wrong, that is not, to me, the work of serious racists. Racists aren't that smart, to be honest with you. I just don't think racists have the brain horsepower to do this. Boaty McBoat, whatever, sorry. I don't think they're smart enough. You have to be rather dim to be a racist, actually. And that's been my experience with the few that I see on TV. I don't believe I've ever met an actual racist face-to-face. So a fair amount of what's going on is doing what Donald Trump seems to do, which is basically poking these people in the eye, intentionally poking the left in the eye. And I just love it. And of all the things I've seen on the internet, I think the thing, and this is quite a big statement, but I think that of all the things that I've seen on the internet, in fact, of all the things that I've seen really the human mind do, I'm really almost sure I believe this. I'm even putting maybe even the moon landing into this pot, because to me it was such an astonishing pieces of just sheer intellectual horsepower, just raw intelligence at work. Were two things that I saw on Internet Historian and having to do with 4chan. The first thing I saw was how the person who beat up the Antifa coward who beat Trump supporters up with a bike lock a year or two ago at Milo events or whatever. There was constant scuffles with Antifa and pro-Trump people, but there was one guy who came forward out of the crowd, and he had on his black hat, his black everything, black. Just, all you could see was his slits of his eyes, basically. He stepped forward with a bike lock and bashed this guy over the head. And the guy was okay, but I mean, he was bleeding pretty heavily. You don't want to get bashed over the head with a bike lock. It's assault with a deadly weapon. And there was no way to tell who this guy was, obviously, because all you could see was his eyes. And there's just a couple of, frames of, kind of video that's sort of, ragged. And how you ever going to tell who that guy was? Well, the problem was picked up by these geniuses at 4chan, and they're not only, I call them geniuses because first of all, they have to have the intelligence to understand that this problem is solvable in some way. And so what they did was, how are we going to find out who this person was? And I'm paraphrasing here because I've only seen it once or twice and it's been a while, but essentially what they did was, they looked around and they found out, okay, are there any faces here that we do recognize? And they found some of these faces, and they put those into Google image search and found out what their Facebook pages were and started to draw connections and so on. Then they found there was a picture of this guy in the background standing someplace, and he's holding on to like a Starbucks coffee cup, something like that. They just caught a frame of him in somebody else's video, some other place where he's in the background, way over there, but he's holding a Starbucks coffee cup. And they say, okay, so that's a certain size Starbucks coffee cup, and they measured a real Starbucks coffee cup, and they found out the thing is 7.5 inches tall, whatever. And they say, if that's how big the coffee cup is, this guy has to be about 5'11", between 5'10" and 6 foot, whatever the numbers were, right? But they were able to look at this and determine this guy's relative height. And I'm already just completely hooked on this. Then they started doing all of these other comparisons and doing like a root tree analysis of whose Facebook friends were who. They were looking for somebody of the approximate right age, the approximate right size. They had to have the right eye color. They started to narrow it down, and then somebody had a breakthrough somewhere and said, what about this guy? And then they took this guy's face, his picture of this guy's face from Facebook or wherever they found his picture, and rotated and scaled it and superimposed it 50% opaque in Photoshop over the frames that you could see of this guy. And it turns out that the eyes and the facial structure matched exactly with the guy behind the mask. So then they looked deeper into this guy, and they found out that this guy was in fact a member of Antifa, that he was in that neighborhood, all of it. They found the guy, and they reported him to the FBI, and he was arrested. And I was just simply blown away by this. God, that's brilliant. But it pales in comparison with the other thing that they've done as an ongoing basis. See, I'm stupid enough to get myself into trouble, and sometimes I get myself into deep trouble, but I'm not so stupid that once I'm in deep trouble, I just keep digging. And this is exactly what Shia LaBeouf did. So Shia LaBeouf loses his mind when Trump is elected, and he decides that he's going to put a webcam up in New York City, and he's going to basically be there. Shia LaBeouf's going to be there on this webcam. He's going to be screaming into this webcam, "He will not divide us, he will not divide us, he will not divide us." And then when Shia LaBeouf decides to go home and drink more Red Bull so he can come out and say more of "He will not divide us," the webcam is going to stay on, and people can come forward and they can also shout their hatred at Donald Trump into this webcam. So this goes on for a couple days. Then Trump supporters and 4chan figures out that this webcam is on. So they start coming forward and they start holding up, praise Keck signs and all of this, pro-Trump stuff. And LaBeouf gets so, he's really kind of very demented. He loses his mind. And so they have co-opted his anti-Trump artistic piece into a pro-Trump platform. So LaBeouf shuts down the webcam and opens it up someplace else. And in a short period of time, these guys are able to figure out where that is, and they do it again. Now, there's a couple steps in between that step and the step I'm about to talk about, because it's the one I remember rather well. So Shia LaBeouf's already lost to these guys 3 or 4 times, but he's decided he's going to go to war with them because he's convinced they're Nazis. I'm convinced they're just poking him in the eye, but whatever. And the one story that's on Internet Historian that just simply blew my mind was, so LaBeouf comes back, and he's got a flag flying that says, "We will not divide us." It's a white flag that says, "We will not divide us." It's on a flagpole, and it's out in the country. It's in the middle of the country. And nobody knows where it is. And there's no way to know where it is. It's simply a picture of a flagpole up against the sky. And I remember at this point in the narrative on Internet Historian, I said, well, there's simply no way that you can determine where a flag is by just looking at a pole up against the sky. It's just not possible. This is the genius of this weaponized autism. Nothing's impossible to these guys. That alone is amazing. So what they did was they started watching the feed of the flag. And a couple things happened immediately, and they were so simple that I was ashamed of myself immediately, just simply ashamed of myself that I didn't have the vision to understand that this was a solvable problem. And by the way, this is precisely the kind of thing that my brain is so terribly bad at. This microscopic dissection of things. I'm an assembler. If I'm anything, I'm a guy who puts ideas together. But breaking things down like this is just anathema to me. But here's what they did. They looked at the video. And the first thing they realized was, okay, sky's starting to get dark. Now it's dark. And again, I'm ashamed that I didn't even think of this. They said, well, it's dark, but it's only dark in the Eastern time. It's still sunlight right now in Central Mountain and Pacific times. So already, by one simple observation, they've reduced the search area to the eastern quarter of the United States, and as a matter of fact, confined it to the eastern quarter of the United States because it's not in Europe, it's not anywhere else. So just by watching the sun go down live, they were able to tell this is approximately somewhere along this line of longitude and also to some degree latitude. But to make a long, long story short, they're watching this and they see in the sky two jet contrails in the distance, way behind the flag, very high, just traces of these two jet contrails coming, two jets moving through the frame and leaving contrails. And since this is a live feed, these guys immediately start looking at the actual air traffic over America and trying to decide what two flights are close together, relatively close together, so on and so forth. Maybe on a slightly diverging path, they don't know what the angle is. But they are able to determine that they think that it is here in this general ballpark, within an area, let's say half the size of a state or something like that. A couple counties, several counties, a couple hundred miles across, something like that. So they say, we think it's here. And the proof that it's here will be that if it is here, we should see another contrail coming from this direction, going this way at precisely 2:16 p.m. Somewhere in there, it should enter the view. If we see a contrail going this way, we know it's the site because we can see that there's a jet coming in this direction, and so on. And sure enough, on the live feed, here comes the contrail from exactly the right direction and exactly the right place at the right time. And I'm at this point watching the story on Internet Historian. I'm just simply mouth open, just simply blown away by the genius of it. Well, they do some more things to get it narrowed down. I want to think it was out of memory. I think it was in Tennessee someplace. And as it turned out, the camera was also providing an audio feed, and you could hear the little birds chirping. So then these geniuses decided, we've got this thing down to a relatively small area. So they got somebody, or a bunch of people, maybe, to drive around that general area and beep their horns. And once they could hear the car beeping horn on the webcam feed, they got in touch with that person and say, we can hear you now. Go a mile in a certain direction and beep it again. They'd go in a direction, beep it again, and got louder. I said, okay, that's closer. And by basically just asking, by doing this feedback, they just simply walked this person in, and the next thing you know, there's a flagpole out in the middle of a field in the middle of nowhere in Tennessee with a "He Will Not Divide Us" flag. And rather quickly it was taken down and something like underwear was put up or a Keck flag or something. And they did all this in, I want to say, 30 hours. So LaBeouf moves to Finland. He's going to do it in the world now. Now he's broadcasting from inside a room, and nobody knows where. There's a live feed from inside a room. Nobody knows where. I gave it away by saying Finland. They didn't know where it was. They check it out. They find out the light patterns. They look at the reflections. They look at the patterns of light on the wall. What kind of furniture is in there? And they figure it's in Finland. Or Denmark, I think it was Finland, and then okay, so now they start saying, well, what about this piece of furniture? Where is it sold? And they look for stores in Finland online that sell this piece of furniture, and they get that down. And the next thing you know, they're looking at rental properties in Finland, and it turns out that there's a house that has this kind of thing that was rented at this kind of time, and they look at it, and they, boom, sure enough, that's where he is. And it's overwhelming to me. And these people, again, I don't want to say they're conservatives. I don't suspect they are. I suspect they're libertarians. In fact, I'm quite sure they're libertarians. But these people, I am convinced, can discover anything. And it was and remains enormously gratifying to me that they're out there. I don't know how much of the actual racism that's out there is real. I know there's one of the Chans is known for having a bunch of, really bizarre, dark porn, including underage porn out there. And needless to say, it's not something I want to identify myself with. But that's the internet, right? The internet is the internet is absolute freedom. It's absolute freedom in all of its forms. And so I would like to talk to them about freedom of speech, and I think that given the level of intelligence of these people, that they are maybe our best defense against this kind of, you know, Google, Facebook, YouTube totalitarianism. So anyway, yeah, that's really, really interesting to me. And I said I'd do one more. We'll do one more.